Welcome to Key Tech. Please describe this channel if you are interested in today's video. Recently, the US Space News website reported that Joseph Aschback, director of the European Space Agency, recently publicly stated that there is currently no plan to send European astronauts to the newly constructed Tiangong space station in China, and the European Space Agency will not do so in the future. Continue to have any cooperation with China in the field of manned spaceflight. The agency has neither the budgetary capacity nor the political will to send its astronauts to the Chinese space station. That is to say, the China-Europe Manned Space Cooperation Plan, which was formally determined earlier, is currently suspended due to the unilateral announcement of the European Space Agency. Therefore, there will be no ESA astronauts on China's Tiangong space station in the short term. Before that, in 2014, ESA signed a bilateral cooperation agreement with China National Space Administration, which is the 2015 to 2020 Sino-European Space Cooperation Outline. The agreement clearly stipulates that starting from 2015, China and the EU will carry out in-depth cooperation in aerospace fields such as deep space exploration, Earth observation, manned spaceflight, and space debris. Tiangong Space Station, China and Europe cooperate to carry out space science and other aerospace cooperation. Looking back on the past few years, the cooperation between China and Europe in the aerospace field can be seen from the joint efforts of both parties. For example, when China launched the first Mars probe Tianwen-1 in 2020, the European Space Operations Center under the European Space Agency Tianwen-1 has provided telemetry and tracking services when it entered Mars orbit. The ground monitoring station of the Guyana Space Launch Center under the European Space Agency has provided ground data transmission for the orbit transfer of Tianwen-1. The Bureau's Mars Express probe provided data relay services for Tianwen-1 to contact the Earth after it landed on Mars. Especially in terms of manned spaceflight cooperation between China and Europe, from the official signing of the Cooperation Outline in 2014 to 2017, the European Space Agency sent 3 astronauts to the Yantai Aerospace Training Center to conduct space training together with active Chinese astronauts to enter the Tiangong space station. It can be said that in terms of manned spaceflight cooperation between China and Europe, whether it is from the cooperation agreement signed by the two sides earlier, to the joint training of Chinese and European astronauts in the middle, and then to 2023, which is this year, European astronauts are going to take the Chinese Shenzhou manned spacecraft, and China astronauts stationed in the Tiangong space station together. It can be said that China's manned space cooperation has successfully completed 99% of the previous cooperative training, only waiting for European astronauts to enter the Chinese Tiangong space station this year. But now the European Space Agency has unilaterally torn up the agreement. Not only very irresponsible performance also actively ruined the opportunity for ESA to develop and grow. Originally, the cooperation between China and Europe in manned spaceflight has always been very smooth. The biggest reason why the European Space Agency is willing to carry out in-depth space cooperation with China, especially manned space cooperation, is the International Space Station where European astronauts can be stationed before. It is close to the extended service period, and it is expected that after the postponement of service, it can only last until around 2026. For the European Space Agency, after the official retirement of the International Space Station, the United States and Russia, which led and undertook most of the construction tasks, did not intend to continue to build a new space station, so the European Space Agency chose to cooperate with China, which had already started the Tiangong space station project at that time. Cooperation, in addition to being able to take the express train to continue to provide a continuous space in orbit service for European astronauts, but also to carry out more cooperation in the aerospace field with China, which has gradually grown into a space power, to achieve mutual benefit. The media has reported many times earlier that astronauts from Germany, France, and Italy are intensively learning Chinese, and have participated in joint training with Chinese astronauts many times. Yi Guangfu participated in the cave exploration training in Sardinia led by the European Space Agency in 2016. After that, ESA sent personnel to participate in the sea rescue training held in the waters of the Yellow Sea of China. The expected female astronauts of ESA, Samantha Cristoforetti and Matthias Maurer, from the current information, the possibility of entering the Chinese space station will be significantly reduced. Now, ESA is voluntarily abandoning the manned spaceflight program that the two sides have insisted on for many years when it is about to board a Chinese spacecraft and is preparing to station in the Chinese space station this year. It can be said that it is completely and proactively losing its only space cooperation advantage. It can be seen from the speech of the director of the European Space Agency that it is obviously subject to political demands from the United States, intending to prevent European astronauts from entering the Chinese space station, but to enter the International Space Station, which is on the verge of decommissioning. The current European Space Agency basically does not do deep space and planetary projects. Most of the money is spent on near-Earth projects, with limited budgets and bizarre twists and turns. The European version of the Starlink project, which plans to spend $6 billion to build, actually lacks a financial budget. If you want to launch your own rocket, you either fail or have no available rockets, entering the highlight moment of manned spaceflight, but encountered interference from the United States. Looking back on the past, just as China was preparing to join the Galileo program back then, there was interference from the United States everywhere behind it. Commercial satellite launches and other businesses back then were also torn up contracts because of the interference of the United States. This is not the first time that the European Space Agency has torn up the agreement. At the beginning of the 21st century, China and Europe carried out satellite navigation system cooperation. In 2003, a China-Europe Satellite Navigation Technology Training Cooperation Center was established in Beijing. China will invest €200 million, about 2 billion renminbi, participating in the satellite development, technology development, ground facilities, and user services of the program. The agreement makes China the first non-EU country to fully participate in the plan, and China will therefore have 20% ownership and 100% use rights to Galileo. He believes that once China and Europe have mastered the global satellite navigation technology, it will be even more unfavorable to them. Exclude China. At that time, China knew that it was hopeless to let Europeans share navigation technology, so in 2005, it proposed to let Europe provide the core technology of atomic clock, but it was still rejected and China was kicked out of the project. And the failure of this cooperation, the EU will never think that it is the biggest loser. Because the EU has signed an agreement with GPS, it can no longer use frequencies similar to GPS, turn your face and deny it. As China launches satellites to use frequencies, the European Union has fallen into the embarrassing situation of no frequencies and no availability. More than 10 years later, relying on its own efforts, China unilaterally built its own Beidou 3 global satellite navigation system. Although China and Europe have had unpleasant experiences in aerospace, there is also a basis for cooperation. As early as 1994, China and Europe signed an agreement on the application of European Remote Sensing Satellite (ERS) data to cooperate. In 1997, China and Europe decided to carry out cooperation projects to further use ERS data. In the catastrophic flood in China in 1998, ERS radar images played a role in flood mapping. With the aforementioned foundation, ESA and the Ministry of Science and Technology conducted consultations and joint research on how to strengthen and improve cooperation. By 2004, the Dragon project officially launched. It will be mainly used in the monitoring and research of agriculture, floods, forests, air quality, climate change, oceans, etc. Today, the Dragon project is still in progress. As far as China is concerned, ESA chose this time to unilaterally terminate the cooperation, which has no impact on China. After all, China is in the leading position in manned spaceflight cooperation. In terms of overall aerospace technology, China has already proved its strong advantages with practical actions. ESA chose this time to terminate China-EU cooperation, no matter what the reason is. For China's manned spaceflight field, those who achieve great things do not seek out others, and it is better not to come.